Something crazy just happened. Today we're diving into the wildest conspiracy theories backed by Charlie Kirk. From election fraud to COVID lies, George Floyd conspiracies, and even claims about cultural Marxism. This video will blow your mind because we're breaking down every shocking statement, every controversy, and every twist in his journey to becoming one of the most polarizing figures in America. From the very beginning, Kirk understood that controversy sells. He positioned himself as a warrior against liberal college education, arguing that universities were not places of free debate, but islands of totalitarianism. This line caught attention because it tapped into a fear many conservatives already had, that higher education was turning their kids into leftists. Instead of just saying universities leaned liberal, he framed them as part of a bigger plot against American values. Turning Point USA was the big project that made Charlie Kirk a national figure. He founded it in 2012 when he was just 18 years old. Most people his age were busy worrying about exams or college applications, but Kirk decided he wanted to create a youth movement that fought what he called liberal dominance on American campuses. He started small, speaking at community events and reaching out to donors who liked his energy. From the start, TPUSA wasn't just about politics, it was about branding. The organization created flashy social media graphics, short viral videos, and campus events that attracted students with promises of free speech and conservative values. But under the surface, it also became a hub for spreading controversial ideas. One of the first patterns that emerged was Kirk's focus on framing universities as enemies of freedom. He often claimed that conservative students were being silenced, even when many examples turned out to be exaggerated. This narrative worked perfectly on social media because it made young conservatives feel like rebels fighting against a powerful system. The organization quickly caught the attention of wealthy donors. People like the Koch brothers, who had already invested heavily in conservative activism, saw TPUSA as a way to influence the next generation. With money flowing in, TPUSA expanded rapidly. By 2016, it had chapters in hundreds of colleges across America, and Kirk was being invited to conservative conferences and even White House events. But as the group grew, so did the controversies. Critics accused TPUSA of promoting misleading statistics about topics like socialism, taxation, and immigration. For example, their viral memes often oversimplified complex issues, presenting them as black and white battles between patriots and enemies of America. Kirk defended this approach, saying young people needed simple, bold messages to get engaged. One of the earliest personal stories Charlie Kirk used to explain his politics was about his rejection from West Point, the U.S. military academy. In 2015, at a speech in Silicon Valley, he said that he had applied to West Point and was turned down. According to him, the slot that should have gone to him was given to a less qualified candidate of a different gender and persuasion. He claimed he even knew the person's test scores and suggested they were much lower than his. This story quickly became part of his public image because it tied directly into the conservative grievance against affirmative action. Kirk painted himself as someone personally harmed by what he saw as unfair racial and gender-based preferences. For many young conservatives, it was a relatable tale. The idea that hardworking people were losing opportunities to political correctness. But over time, the story began to fall apart. When journalists investigated, Kirk gave different versions. In a 2017 interview with The New Yorker, he said he was being sarcastic when he told the story. A year later, in a 2018 Chicago Tribune interview, he said he was just repeating something he had heard from others. And in 2019, at a Turning Point event, he flatly claimed he never said it. These contradictions raised questions about whether the story was ever true or whether it was just an anecdote designed to build his political brand. The death of George Floyd in May 2020 became a turning point in American history. For most people, it was a shocking reminder of police brutality and racial injustice. But for Charlie Kirk, it became another stage to push controversial claims. Instead of focusing on the video evidence that showed Floyd pinned under the officer's knee, Kirk promoted alternative narratives that questioned the victim himself. On his platforms, Kirk repeated claims that Floyd had been illegally counterfeiting currency and had once put a gun to a pregnant woman's stomach. These claims, even though unrelated to the incident, were used to paint Floyd as a criminal rather than a victim. Fact-checkers repeatedly pointed out that these statements were misleading, exaggerated, or taken out of context, but they spread quickly because they fed into the idea that protests against police brutality were based on falsehoods. Kirk also amplified one of the most widely debunked conspiracies of that moment: the claim that Floyd had died from a drug overdose rather than from police actions. On Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble, he pushed the narrative that the medical examiner had said Floyd's death was caused by fentanyl. This was completely false. The official autopsy ruled it a homicide caused by cardiopulmonary arrest complicating law enforcement. Subdual. When AFP fact-checked the claim, corrections were forced onto Kirk's posts. But by then, the damage was done. Millions had already seen and shared the false claims. This tactic, introducing doubt and confusion, was a classic part of Kirk's strategy. Instead of addressing the systemic issue of police misconduct, he shifted the conversation to Floyd's past, the drugs in his system, and supposed inconsistencies in the autopsy. Charlie Kirk's style of communication often relied on bold, shocking numbers or dramatic claims that spread quickly online. A good example came in July 2018, when he tweeted that the U.S. had massively increased arrests for human trafficking. He wrote that the numbers had jumped from around 1,900 arrests in 2016 to over 6,000 in just the first half of 2018. The problem was, none of it was true. Fact-checkers traced the 6,087 arrest number back to the anonymous image board 8chan, a website known for conspiracy theories. There was no government report or Justice Department statistic to support it. Within 24 hours, Kirk deleted the tweet without explanation. But by that point, it had been seen by hundreds of thousands of people and shared widely across conservative circles. For many, the false claims stuck. This moment showed how quickly Kirk could push unverified information into mainstream debate. Even if the numbers were wrong, the idea that Trump's administration had launched a massive crackdown on human trafficking became a talking point for his supporters. A few months later, Kirk did something similar on an international issue. During the French Yellow Vest protests of late 2018, he claimed that crowds in Paris were chanting, "We want Trump." It was an easy line to spread, painting Trump as a global icon admired by protesters abroad. But reporters on the ground, video footage, and translations showed that no such chants were happening. The claim was false, but still the idea went viral, and even Donald Trump himself later repeated it. The 2020 U.S. presidential election was a turning point for Charlie Kirk. Until then, he had been known for campus activism and culture wars. But after Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden, Kirk became one of the loudest voices pushing claims of voter fraud. This wasn't just casual commentary. It was organized, strategic, and highly influential. Kirk repeatedly told his followers that the election was being stolen. He amplified stories of mystery ballots, dead voters, and suitcases filled with fake votes. Even though these claims were investigated and debunked by courts, election officials, and independent fact-checkers. For him, the lack of evidence didn't matter. What mattered was feeding into the narrative that Trump had been cheated. One of his most visible actions came on November 5, 2020, just days after the election. Kirk personally led a Stop the Steal protest outside the Maricopa County Tabulation Center in Phoenix, Arizona. This was one of the main locations where votes were being counted, and tensions were already high. Kirk's presence and speeches gave legitimacy to the idea that something suspicious was happening inside. Protesters gathered with signs and megaphones demanding answers, while election workers were forced to continue under heavy security. Behind the scenes, Kirk's influence was even more significant. According to reports, Rudy Giuliani and other Trump allies considered him a key social influencer in their communications plan to overturn the election. His ability to mobilize young people online and on the ground made him a valuable part of the Stop the Steal machine. When COVID-19 hit in 2020, the world was looking for reliable information. Scientists, doctors, and governments were trying to figure out how to respond to a crisis no one fully understood. But for Charlie Kirk, the pandemic became another battleground for politics and conspiracy theories. From the very beginning, Kirk referred to COVID-19 as the China virus, echoing Donald Trump's language. He suggested that the World Health Organization, WHO, was covering up facts to protect China and claimed that Democrats were using the crisis as a weapon against Trump. These lines were catchy and easy to share online, which made them spread faster than careful explanations from health experts. Kirk's most controversial claim came when he said hydroxychloroquine was 100% effective in curing COVID-19. This was completely false. No scientific study had proven it, and major health organizations warned against its use. But Kirk promoted it on Twitter, reaching millions of followers. As a result, his account was briefly suspended. Rudy Giuliani, who retweeted Kirk's claim, was also suspended. Even though the platform flagged the post, the message had already influenced countless people. He also attacked public health measures. When governors enforced lockdowns and mask rules, Kirk argued that they were plots to take away freedom. He said the science behind masks was very questionable and encouraged people to push back against requirements in schools and churches. He framed restrictions on large church gatherings as a democratic plot against Christianity, suggesting that religion itself was under attack. Later, when vaccines were rolled out, Kirk called the requirements for students to take them medical apartheid. On Fox News, he warned parents to protest at school board meetings and fight back against mandates. Instead of promoting vaccines as protection, he framed them as government control. Kirk also tried to discredit the Obama administration's handling of the 2009 swine flu pandemic, claiming that Obama only declared an emergency after millions infected and over 1,000 deaths. Fact-checkers showed this was false. The emergency was declared with fewer than 300 cases. But by twisting the history, Kirk made Trump's delayed response look better in comparison. Charlie Kirk's politics weren't always deeply religious. In fact, in 2018, he told interviewer Dave Rubin that America should respect the separation of church and state. But within a few years, his position shifted dramatically. By 2019, after meeting Pastor Rob McCoy in California, Kirk started to embrace a new identity, not just as a conservative activist, but as a Christian nationalist. This change was significant because it tied his political arguments to religion. McCoy convinced Kirk that America's founding documents were rooted in the Bible, and that the country's survival depended on returning to a Christian way of life. Kirk adopted this belief and started promoting it at his events and on his show. By 2021, Kirk was quoting the Bible to justify political activism. He often cited a verse, "Occupy until I come," which is used by followers of the Seven Mountain Mandate. This doctrine claims Christians must dominate 7 areas of society: government, education, business, media, family, religion, and entertainment. Kirk didn't just agree with the idea, he actively interviewed the creator of the Seven Mountain concept, showing that he was aligning his movement with it. In speeches, Kirk went further. He said the separation of church and state was a fabrication, and that America's government could not survive without a Christian population. In his words, "You cannot have liberty if you do not have a Christian nation." At rallies for Donald Trump in 2024, he even declared, "This is a Christian state." I'd like to see it stay that way. This shift turned him into a central figure in the growing Christian nationalist movement inside the Republican Party. It was no longer just about policy differences, taxes, immigration, or guns. He also compared being gay to making an error, claiming pride celebrations encouraged unhealthy lifestyles. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more crazy stories just like this.